The whispers had been circulating for years now. Like most rumors in the vastness of the galaxy, they were easy to dismiss, especially those concerning the improbable. Xyler had made a career of dismissing such things, of picking apart galactic legends with the precision of the scientists they were. As an interspecies historian and linguist from a long-lived, highly logical species, Xyler considered themselves above the emotional storytelling that dominated lesser civilizations. And yet, here they were, unable to shake free from the most ridiculous rumor of all. The Kthar were not a species one spoke of lightly. Even mentioning them in certain sectors of the galaxy could cause diplomatic incidents. They were apex predators in every sense, physically imposing with armored exoskeletons that could withstand direct energy weapon impacts, technologically advanced with warships that could outmaneuver anything in the United Galactic Fleet, and possessed of a psychic defense system that made them immune to mental incursions or manipulations. Their warrior culture had conquered 17 star systems in the last millennium alone. No species had ever successfully negotiated with them. No civilization had ever repelled them. The Kthar took what they wanted. They killed who they wanted, and nothing in the known universe could stop them, which is what made the rumors about the humans so patently absurd. Xyler had first encountered the whispers in a trading outpost near the Cygnus Arm, where a drunk Volosian merchant claimed that humans, barely 2 centuries into their interstellar exploration, had somehow halted a Kthar invasion fleet near their fledgling colony on Kepler 186f. The merchant's antennae had twitched with nervous energy as he described the alleged incident, lowering his voice when he reached the most preposterous detail. The humans had apparently stopped the Kthar with something called a physical admonishment, more specifically, a slap. Xyler had dismissed it as nonsense, of course. The idea that any species could halt a Kthar invasion was unlikely enough. The notion that it could be done with what amounted to a primitive physical gesture by humans, no less with their fragile bones and soft flesh, was beyond absurd. And yet, the whispers persisted. Xyler heard variations of the same tale in 3 different star systems over the following months. The Kepler slap had apparently become something of an underground legend. Each telling added new embellishments. Each narrator claimed a more direct connection to the event, but the core remained consistent. A human diplomat had, through some incomprehensible means, halted an entire Kthar invasion fleet with a single physical gesture. It was precisely the kind of myth-making that Xyler had built a distinguished career debunking. This would make an excellent case study in galactic rumor propagation and the creation of interspecies mythology. With proper documentation, Xyler could add another definitive work to their already impressive academic catalog. The Impossible Slap, Anatomy of a Galactic Myth. The first step, as always, was to consult the official records. Xyler's academic status granted them access to the galactic archives, though they found the data on the alleged Kepler incident frustratingly sparse. There had indeed been an incident near Kepler 186f approximately 7 standard years ago. The official terminology was diplomatic anomaly resulting in non-confrontation. The Kthar fleet had been confirmed in the vicinity, but had withdrawn without engaging the human colony. No official explanation was provided for this unprecedented behavior. Suspiciously, many of the details have been redacted from even the highest-level access records. The corresponding human records were similarly vague, referencing only a successful resolution of potential hostilities. The identity of the human diplomat involved had been removed, along with any transcript of the actual exchange. For a myth Xyler had been so certain they could easily debunk, the official silence was unsettling. It suggested, at the very least, that something unusual had occurred, something neither the Central Galactic Authority nor the human government wished to acknowledge publicly. A breakthrough came in the form of a personnel manifest from a support vessel that had been present during the incident. Among the crew was a Xantusian logistics officer named Borfin. Xantusians were known for their photographic memory and attention to detail, valuable traits in logistics work. More importantly, Borfin had since retired from service and was not bound by the same confidentiality protocols as active personnel. Xyler traced Borfin to a remote trading post in the Outer Rim territories. The aging Xantusian had established a modest shipping brokerage in the chaotic, bustling spaceport where species from across the galaxy mingled freely. Finding him wasn't difficult. Convincing him to speak about the Kepler incident proved considerably more challenging. "I don't discuss that day," Borfin said flatly when Xyler first approached him. His azure scales had dulled with age, but his four eyes, characteristic of Xantusians, remained alert, darting nervously around the dingy bar where they sat. "Some things are better left forgotten." "I'm a historian," Xyler explained, their tone calibrated to project professional curiosity rather than sensationalism. "I'm investigating the origin of certain improbable rumors. My interest is academic, not political." Borfin made a hissing sound that might have been a laugh. "Academic, political, what difference does it make? Some knowledge changes things. Changes you." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Have you ever seen a Kthar fleet, historian? Not in recordings or simulations. With your own eyes?" Xyler acknowledged they had not. "Then you cannot understand the terror. Their ships, black as the void between galaxies, with edges that seemed to cut into reality itself. When they appeared above Kepler, Borfin's outer eyelids flickered rapidly, a Xantusian sign of emotional distress. We thought it was the end. The human colony was small, barely established. Their defensive systems were rudimentary at best. The Kthar outnumbered and outgunned them 100-1. Xyler maintained a calm, neutral expression, though their recording implant captured every word. And yet, the attack never came. Borfin stared into his drink, a luminescent blue liquid that cast eerie shadows across his scaled face. The humans sent a single representative to the Kthar flagship. Just one. Not a military commander or high-ranking diplomat. A mid-level cultural liaison named Alara Vance. He shook his head in apparent disbelief, even after all these years. "We all thought it was a suicide mission. The Kthar had never accepted diplomatic envoys before. They usually just consumed them." "How was communication established?" Xyler asked, their professional curiosity genuinely piqued now. "The humans had a rudimentary universal translator, primitive by our standards, but functional. The Kthar allowed the communication link. We could see and hear everything through the diplomatic feed, at least until it cut out." Borfin's eyes took on a distant look. The supreme commander of the Kthar was terrifying. Even through a view screen, you could feel the psychic pressure of its presence. 9 feet tall, with that characteristic bone-plated exoskeleton and those mandibles that could crush durasteel. It towered over Vance. "What do they discuss?" Xyler pressed, sensing they were finally approaching the heart of the mystery. The Kthar made their intentions clear. They wanted the Kepler system. The humans could evacuate or be eliminated. Standard Kthar diplomacy. Borfin took a long drink. Vance attempted to negotiate, offered trade agreements, boundary recognitions, the usual diplomatic options. The Supreme Commander dismissed them all. Then it made a threatening gesture toward her, extended those razor-clawed appendages as if to seize her. Borfin paused, his scales shifting color slightly as he recalled the moment. And then Vance. It was so fast, so unexpected. She slapped the primary sensory organ of the Supreme Commander. Just slapped it, like you discipline an unruly child. Xyler couldn't help but interject. "That's impossible. The Kthar exoskeleton can withstand energy weapons. A human hand would break against it." "The sensory organ is one of the few unprotected areas," Borfin explained. "It's surrounded by their mandibles precisely because it's vulnerable. But no one would ever think to attack it directly. The mandibles would sever any limb that tried." Yet somehow, Vance's hand moved too quickly, or at just the right angle. He shook his head. The feed went chaotic after that. There were sounds, not quite words, not quite screams. Then it cut out entirely. And then, hours of silence. Absolute terror in our fleet. We were preparing for annihilation. Then, nothing. The Cathar ships simply turned and left the system without explanation. No further communication, no aggression. They just withdrew. Xyler sat back, processing this information against their understanding of Cathar psychology and biology. It made no sense. No species, especially one as proud and aggressive as the Cathar, would retreat over something so minor, even if it were physically possible. "You don't believe me," Borfin said, noticing Xyler's skepticism. "I wouldn't either if I hadn't seen it. I still don't understand why it worked." But the slap happened, and the Cathar left. "What happened to Vance afterward?" Xyler asked. "Reassigned immediately." The incident was classified at the highest levels. Most records were purged or redacted. Borfin reached into a pocket of his utility vest and produced a small data chip. "But I kept this, Vance's public service record, before her reassignment. It's not much, but it might help your academic inquiry." Xyler accepted the chip, intrigued despite their lingering doubts. "Why give this to me?" Borfin's scales rippled in what Xyler recognized as the Xantusian equivalent of shrug. Perhaps it's time someone understood what really happened. The rumors are already out there, distorting with each telling. Maybe the truth, however strange, is better. Back on their research vessel, Xyler examined Vance's service record. It was underwhelming. Alara Vance had been an unremarkable cultural liaison with a background in pre-space flight, human social structures, and animal behavior. Her specialties were listed as primate hierarchical systems and canine training methodologies. Nothing in her record suggested exceptional diplomatic skills or any special qualification for first contact with the galaxy's most feared predators. This only deepened the mystery. If anything, it made the official version of events even less plausible. Why send such a junior, seemingly unqualified officer to face the Cathar? And how could her background in Earth animal behavior possibly be relevant to an alien species with no evolutionary connection to Earth life? Xyler's logical mind rebelled against the growing evidence that the Kepler slap might have some basis in reality. They needed more data. Specifically, they needed to understand humans better. Over the following weeks, Xyler immersed themselves in human evolutionary history and psychology, focusing particularly on interspecies interactions within Earth's ecosystem. Humans, it seemed, had evolved alongside predator species and had developed unique neurological and social adaptations for establishing dominance hierarchies without lethal confrontation. The domestication of wolves into dogs proved especially interesting. Early humans had somehow transformed one of their planet's most dangerous predators into a cooperative species through a combination of selective breeding and social conditioning. The training methods Vance had specialized in involved establishing clear boundaries and hierarchical positioning through voice modulation, posture, and specific physical corrections, including quick, non-injurious physical admonishments. Similar patterns emerged in studies of primate social structures. Non-lethal physical corrections, including slapping behaviors, were documented as methods of establishing dominance or enforcing social boundaries within groups. These weren't random acts of aggression, but highly codified social signals that conveyed specific meaning within the group's understanding of hierarchy. A hypothesis began to form in Xyler's mind. Could Vance's slap, combined with whatever posture and vocal tone she might have employed, even if poorly translated, have inadvertently triggered some deeply instinctual, subconscious pathway in the Supreme Commander's brain? A response that bypassed the Cathar's psychic defenses precisely because of its biological, non-technological, and completely unexpected nature? A response so alien to Cathar experience that it created a cognitive dissonance in Cathar psychology, where all challenges were treated as life-or-death confrontations. It seemed far-fetched, yet it aligned with the observed outcome better than any alternative explanation Xyler could formulate. To confirm the hypothesis, however, Xyler needed to speak with Alara Vance herself. Tracing Vance proved difficult. After the Kepler incident, her record showed multiple reassignments, each more obscure than the last, until she simply disappeared from official documentation altogether. It took Xyler 3 months of careful investigation, calling in favors from contacts throughout the galaxy, before they finally located her on a remote agricultural world at the edge of human space. Alara Vance had aged considerably in the 7 years since the incident. Her once dark hair had gone completely gray, and deep lines creased her face. She lived alone in a modest dwelling surrounded by fields of an earth grain crop called wheat. When Xyler arrived unannounced at her door, she showed no surprise. "I've been expecting someone like you for years," she said, inviting Xyler inside. "Historian? Journalist? Intelligence operative?" "Historian," Xyler confirmed. "I'm researching what some call the Kepler slap." Vance's weathered face tightened at the phrase. "That's what they're calling it? Sounds like a dance move." She gestured toward a simple chair. "Sit, if your physiology allows it. I'll make tea." As she prepared the beverage, a human ritual Xyler was familiar with from their research, Vance spoke without turning. "You've spoken to Borfin, I assume? He's the only one who would have records that could lead you here." "Yes," Xyler admitted. "He provided a compelling account, but it raises more questions than it answers, such as why a slap would send the most feared warriors in the galaxy running." Vance handed Xyler a steaming cup of amber liquid. "Precisely." Vance sat across from them, cradling her own cup. "The truth is, I barely remember doing it. Pure instinct, completely thoughtless. When the Supreme Commander made that gesture toward me, she mimicked a grabbing motion. Something just took over. The same reaction I might have had if an aggressive dog lunged at me, or if someone invaded my personal space threateningly. I didn't think, I just acted." "You had no idea it would work?" Xyler asked. Vance laughed, a short, sharp sound. "God, no. I thought I was dead the moment I did it. I still don't fully understand why it worked, though I've had 7 years to think about it." "What's your theory?" She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "The Kthar have never encountered a species like humans before. We evolved alongside predators, sometimes as prey, sometimes as predators ourselves. We developed complex social structures that allowed us to establish dominance and boundaries without killing each other. The slap, it wasn't an attack. It was a correction, a social signal saying no, this behavior is unacceptable, rather than I'm trying to kill you. And this confused the Kthar," Xyler suggested. "I think it short-circuited something in their psychology," Vance replied. "They understand threats and submissions. They understand death and conquest. But a species that stands its ground without lethal intent, that establishes boundaries through social signals rather than weapons, it created a category error in their minds. They didn't know how to process it." Xyler nodded slowly. "This aligns with my hypothesis. But what happened afterward? Why the secrecy?" Vance set down her cup. High Command was baffled, but recognized the potential. Interspecies psychologists, working from my intuitive understanding and historical/biological data, began developing what they called the Vance Protocol, officially termed non-lethal hierarchical tension release. It involves training special personnel to recreate the subconscious signals I displayed, specific postures, micro-expressions, sharp vocal tones, and contextually appropriate physical boundary-affirming actions that don't cause injury. "A weaponized slap," Xyler said, unable to keep a note of disbelief from their voice. "No," Vance corrected firmly. "Not a weapon. A communication tool. It's not about controlling other species. It's about sending a social error message that disrupts aggressive patterns based on life-or-death challenge assumptions. It forces a reassessment." She sighed. "It only works because the Kthar, for all their power, still possess ancient social hierarchical instincts they've never acknowledged." "Has it been used since Kepler?" Xyler asked, sparingly, ethically by specialized diplomatic teams. "It's prevented conflicts elsewhere." Vance's expression darkened. "I'm not entirely comfortable with the protocolization of what was essentially an instinctive human reaction. It feels like it strips away the authenticity of communication. But I understand its utility in preventing bloodshed. The Kthar have avoided human space entirely since the incident," Xyler observed. "Yes, they're not allies, but the border conflicts have ceased. They treat us with a strange mixture of confusion and cautious respect." Vance smiled thinly. were the only species that ever made them back down without firing a shot. As Zeiler prepared their report on the journey back to Central Academic Space, they found themselves profoundly reassessing their understanding of interspecies relations. The Kepler slap was, in essence, true, but its implications were not what the rumors suggested. It wasn't a story of human dominance or some mystical power. It was a strange evolutionary accident, the result of humanity's unique developmental path regarding social interaction and interspecies communication. It was a biological/instinctual response, not a planned strategy or weapon. The slap hadn't defeated the most dangerous predator in the galaxy. Rather, it had established a boundary that made them pause. A communication so fundamental yet so alien to Cthar experience that it created cognitive dissonance where violence had always been the only language. Zeiler's report would reshape the Kepler slap, not as a tale of human superiority, but as a profound example of how deeply embedded evolutionary traits could have galaxy-altering consequences. It emphasized the importance of understanding the biological basis of behavior across species in navigating the complexities of the universe. The whispers would continue, of course. Legends had a way of persisting despite academic corrections. But perhaps a few would understand the deeper truth, that the most effective forms of communication sometimes transcended language and technology, stemming from the most ancient, most shared biological foundations. Humans, in their apparent fragility, possessed a unique, often unconscious understanding of this. Zeiler had set out to debunk a myth and had instead confirmed a more nuanced, more fascinating reality. The universe, it seemed, was stranger and more interconnected than pure logic could comprehend. Perhaps there was value in listening to whispers after all. The humans had not conquered the Cthar. They had not discovered some mystical weakness. They had simply spoken to them in the most ancient language of all, the language of social boundaries that predated words, predated civilization, predated even consciousness itself. And somehow, across the gulf of evolution and star systems, that language had been understood. In the vastness of space, filled with incomprehensible differences between species, perhaps such shared biological foundations were the most precious commonality of all. As Zeiler finalized their report, they wondered what other supposed myths might contain kernels of truth waiting to be discovered by those willing to look beyond the surface. In a universe of endless diversity, perhaps the most extraordinary discoveries lay not in the differences between species, but in the unexpected similarities that bound them together across the tapestry of evolution, even when those evolutionary paths had unfolded on worlds separated by countless light years. The Kepler slap hadn't been an act of aggression meant to subjugate a predator. It had been a boundary that made them stop, a boundary recognized across the stars. In the years that followed, Ilara Vance continued her quiet life on the agricultural world, cultivating earth wheat beneath alien skies. She rarely spoke about the incident that had inadvertently altered galactic politics. When pressed, she would simply say that she'd done nothing special. She'd simply reacted as any human might when faced with an uncomfortable boundary violation. Perhaps that was the most remarkable aspect of the whole affair. What had seemed miraculous to the galaxy had been, to her, merely instinctual, a gesture so deeply encoded in human social behavior that it required no thought, no planning, no special training. Just the accumulated weight of millions of years of evolution, expressed in a single, thoughtless moment. The Cthar, meanwhile, maintained their distance from human space. Rumors suggested they had developed new training protocols of their own, methods to recognize and counter the strange, disorienting effect of human boundary-setting behaviors. Other rumors claimed they had begun studying human social structures with intense interest, perhaps seeking to understand the species that had so inexplicably disrupted their conquest. Whatever the truth, one fact remained clear. No Cthar fleet had approached a human settlement since the Kepler incident. The most feared predators in the galaxy had, it seemed, decided that humans were best observed from a safe distance. Zeiler's report became a foundational text in the emerging field of evolutionary xenopsychology. Their analysis of the Kepler incident opened new avenues of research into the biological underpinnings of interstellar diplomacy. Species that had evolved as predators, they theorized, might share certain psychological traits regardless of their physical differences, including responses to hierarchical challenges. For a galactic community that had long focused on technological solutions to interspecies conflict, this biological perspective represented a paradigm shift. Perhaps the most effective diplomatic tools weren't translators or weapons, but a deeper understanding of the evolutionary psychology that shaped each species' perception of others. The Vance Protocol remained classified, used only by specialized human diplomatic teams in the most desperate circumstances. It was not a universal solution. Many species lacked the hierarchical social structures that made the Cathar vulnerable to it, but it had prevented bloodshed on multiple occasions. Alara Vance herself was never again called to diplomatic service. Her brief, accidental moment in galactic history complete, she lived out her days in relative obscurity, tending her fields under alien skies, far from the corridors of power where her name was spoken in hushed tones. She preferred it that way. Fame had never been her ambition, and the responsibility of wielding such influence had weighed heavily on her. Let others study the implications of what she had done. She was content to have played her part in making the galaxy a slightly less violent place. On rare occasions, when the weather was clear and the stars shone brightly in the night sky, she would stand in her fields and look up, wondering which distant point of light might be the Cathar homeworld. She wondered if, somewhere in that distant star system, a Cathar researcher was looking back toward human space, equally puzzled by the species that had challenged everything they thought they knew about the natural order of the universe. Perhaps someday, when the memory of the slap had faded into true legend, humans and Cathar might meet again, not as predator and prey, but as two species with a strange, shared understanding. Until then, the whispers would continue, spreading from world to world, system to system, growing and changing with each telling. And somewhere in the vast library of galactic knowledge, Zeiler's careful analysis would remain, waiting for those who sought not the legend, but the truth, the strange, improbable truth that sometimes the most powerful gesture in the universe could be the simplest. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. The apex predators, terror of the galaxy, had been stopped not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by an instinctive gesture from a species that, until recently, had been confined to a single, unremarkable world in an unremarkable star system. Perhaps that was the greatest lesson of the Kepler incident. In a galaxy of wonders and terrors, of technologies beyond imagination and powers beyond comprehension, sometimes the most effective solution was the most fundamentally organic, a solution written not in the codes of computers or the equations of physics, but in the ancient, shared language of life itself. Zeiler, in the conclusion of their report, suggested that perhaps there was wisdom in approaching the galaxy not just with the tools of civilization, but with an awareness of the deeper, older instincts that had shaped all sentient life. Perhaps true understanding between species required not just translation of words, but translation of the unspoken biological languages that preceded them. The whispers of the Kepler slap would continue, growing more fantastic with each telling. But those who knew, those who had studied Zeiler's work or spoken with Alara Vance, understood that the truth was both simpler and more profound than any legend could capture. In the end, it wasn't the slap that had changed the course of galactic history. It was the recognition, however brief and unconscious, of something shared across the gulf of evolution and space. A moment of unexpected connection between two species that should have had nothing in common. And perhaps, in a universe so vast and diverse that true understanding often seemed impossible, such moments of connection, however accidental, however strange, were the most valuable commodity of all.